helps with all of the technical magic behind the scenes, as well as Alex Garraby. Thank you so much for getting us all set up, and joined by Alexa Pearson, teaching and learning, and Dan, our assessment director, Dan Farley. So um, we are thrilled to have you, and thanks for being here today. Also believe we have Peter Weber here and KT from OSS OSAA. I'm looking for them. Oh, there we go. Hi, Peter Weber. Welcome.
Hello, thank you.
Thanks for being here for office hours. We know how much is on your plate as well, and appreciate you making the time today. So I'm going to go over just a couple of key introductory slides, and then we'll set the table for our time together today around two key topics. So as many of you know, our office hours are designed to take a deeper dive into Ready School Safe Learners, a way to support one another as we sense make the incredible complexity at play as we hold school in many different ways across the state, primarily in comprehensive distance learning. So this hour together every day is intended to really create a sense of personalized support. It's intended to help you get clear on questions and places of where things may still seem murky or unclear. Hopefully it inspires some new thinking or new questions. That's always an aim. Maybe a good laugh or two if we're doing things right. Scott reminds us of the importance of laughter amid the work. And of course, we want to make sure that we're reinforcing core anchor ideas and values and the guidance that frame all of our instructional models this school year. So today, Scott Nine and I will be facilitating. Ash will be helping to navigate the chat along with Alex, Dan, and Alexa. And please use the chat for any specific questions you have. We'll do our best to be responsive throughout. If you have a question that's highly unique to your own context and that context may not be widely shared among others, just a request to be sensitive to how much space that question take up, and follow up with us individually one-on-one after the office hours if that's possible. And then a reminder that these office hours are recorded, and if you're really desperate, you can watch them again. But we intend for this to be a resource for you to share with others, maybe colleagues on your team that weren't able to be in attendance, so everyone's getting the same information and sense making collectively. So topics for today, first, just a reminder, big appreciation for all of you that are filling out the weekly COVID-19 status reports. Second, today we're going to focus on two key topics. One, Peter Weber is here to address OSAA questions. And then we have a third-party standardized assessment guidance. So in other words, the guidance you've been asking for and patiently waiting for around SAT and ACT is ready to be released, and will be released very shortly, i.e. likely by close of business today. And so we're here to talk through the highlights of that guidance and share it with you. And then wanted to make sure that you knew that metrics will be getting further clarification as Scott has shared earlier with you. So we wanted to let you know that we won't be updating anything. We have nothing to update around that topic today, but to signal that there may be some pending updates around metrics. And with that, I think we'll introduce Peter Weber to help address OSAA questions. Peter, if that works for you and your timeline. And what you're seeing now is the requirements for standard. Thank you. Perfect. Thanks so much, Alex, for toggling back one slide. So Peter, maybe it'd be helpful to first introduce yourself to RSSL office hours. And if you could just kind of highlight for people what you think is worth naming and noting and framing around the work that you do. And then we can field questions in the chat to frame up our time with you today.
That sounds great. Thanks, Jennifer, for the opportunity. As you mentioned earlier, Katie Emerson from our staff is on as well. And so both of us are happy to try and address questions that people have or things that come up in the chat or what have you. So we appreciate that. I think in general for us, we've been trying to focus on making sure, trying to provide as many clarifications as possible for people on what's allowed right now, given the guidance that is out there. So specifically with regards to athletics and activities, there's kind of two different pieces with it. The first with athletics is that guidance is coming straight from the governor's office and OHA. In terms of activities and specific, some of the music considerations and things that I know have been discussed on this before, those are coming more from ODE, and I know KT has been working with Alexa and Scott and Jennifer on some of that guidance and trying to get that out as well. So there's really two kind of parameters there. In terms of the athletic guidance, everything in terms of what's allowed for schools to do now at their discretion and what we're calling season one here at the OSAA. Again, we shifted our seasons 2, 3, and 4. So the winter is season 2, the fall is season 3, and spring is season 4. We shifted those to January through June, but the season 1 that's going on right now allows schools at their local discretion to provide opportunities for students. And really it's focused on a couple of different guidelines from K-12 school sports guidance issued by the governor's office. And the first key piece of that is what instructional method schools are in. So that's really the baseline. If schools are in a comprehensive distance learning format, are they in a hybrid, or are they on site? And that's really the key is answering that question first, then determines what you're able to do. The next piece of that question, once you've answered the instructional method, talks about, is it an indoor or an outdoor activity? Obviously, outdoor activities are allowed more than indoor, but there are some situations where indoor activities are allowed, and that focus is there. And then we still have, in terms of the sports guidance, we still have a few activities that are prohibited as full contact activities, specifically talking about football, wrestling, basketball at this point, our dance and cheerleading when they're in a non-contact format, so no stunting, no lifting. People could do those, and we have schools that are doing those as well. But it's really that focus on the idea of what's your instructional method, is the activity indoors or outdoors, and is it an activity that's allowed? As you can imagine, and I'm sure the people on this call every week, we have every type of scenario going on around the state right now. In fact, just today, I spoke with 2 different schools. One is a school that today, for the first time, was opening up some outdoor workouts for some of their kids and just getting going with that. We have other schools, and I talked to one today. They've played already 6 volleyball indoor matches because they're back in school and they're allowed to do that via the guidance. So it's a little bit all over the board, but that's where you determine what's allowed and what's not allowed in terms of the athletic guidance. I'm going to turn it over to KT to talk a little bit about some of the music considerations and things that she's kind of run point for us on, and then we'd be happy to try and answer questions. I'll look at the chat room as well. I saw a couple pop in when I was talking. So KT, do you want to specifically address some of the music stuff?
Sure, and thanks for having us here today, guys. It's really helpful to be able to present. And I want to back up a step to what Peter was just talking about. It's a little bit all over the board on what schools are doing and what they're participating in. And part of that is, the feeling within the district of what they're going to be able to allow, the comfort level that's present there. And that happens, and that's based on somewhat what's happening in their county. So in those numbers that are going up, it also happens to be with accessibility for kids as well. So, and whether or not those kids are able to access outside of their school, or they can only access back at their school. And so we're watching schools slowly roll back, and the whole why of it is to get kids back in front of trusted adults. So that's the number one reason, is they're back in front of certified coaches. They're back in front of, adults that have worked with them before and make those connections again. But even when we have people starting up and they're starting maybe in a slow way of having 10 students only coming to a workout, they're doing it in a way that's really keeping, with an attempt to really keep the kids completely safe. So masked and distanced and not congregating, which is changing a whole norm in the world of athletics and activities for sure. So the reason why kids do it is to congregate so and be together. So shifting that has taken a lot of work too. So we've been monitoring all those models across the state. With music, I think a key is that, you know, the guidance for music has already come from ODE. There is the visual and performing arts additional considerations that's from ODE that has been specified for our music programs to follow, our performing arts programs to follow. And then the question that's come up a lot for performing arts is, what if we wanted to do an after school model for our performing arts because we are in CDL? So for a school district who is in comprehensive distance learning and bringing athletics back on to their fields and courts and being able to participate, they feel that there should be some sort of way to bring their performing arts back as well. And so that's where that question has come from. And so we reached out to ODE about what should we be giving them guidance-wise on what to do. And the guidance that we have been given is the use of the limited in-person instruction model, but applying that to after school. So there's still a couple of questions that we have out there with ODE that we're working through. But the key is 10 students in a cohort. So that's the key. And them being there for a limited amount of time and the director having a limited number of cohorts per day in which they can interact with. And the guide is to try and keep it to a very low number. And the reason why performing arts is at that lower number than maybe say to soccer, who's out on a field doing a workout, is because there's a lot of science behind the performing arts right now that has come out, an aerosol study specifically that's being completed through NFHS that has indicated some of the restrictions that need to be present. So considering that the aerosols that are sent out while students are singing or sent out while wind instruments are being used, that's a piece that we want to be able to consider. So the science that's out there is also causing that restriction as well. So I know ODE continues to work through giving us some of that guidance to give them for that after school model, because there's definitely been the question of what if I take, you know, my wind instruments outside, so and I'm able to perform with them underneath some sort of, you know, canopy or tent or whatever it might be. And that's something that's recommended by the NFHS, is taking those groups outside as they can, obviously weather pending, but those are some of the considerations I know we continue to work through and try to prepare for future, you know, models that we can put forward for after school. But that is a question coming up. I know it's not just performing arts, because as soon as we answer the question about a limited in-person instruction for choir, we hear, what about robotics? And we hear, what about, you know, this other club can we bring in? And so it kind of stretches beyond just performing arts for sure, and beyond what we oversee. But kids, I think, are anxious to get back to the cultural experience that's present at a high school and not just, you know, engaging in class. So during their, you know, online classes, since they're in CDL with this. But yes, we continue to work on some more guidances, but that limited in-person instruction is definitely a starting point for it.
So I saw a question in the chat, KT, that I think Scott answered regarding do the 10 students in a cohort count against the 250 per week? And it appears that he answered that in there. So I think that one's taken care of. There was another question from Greg about gathering size limits, the 250 and the 100, and what that means in terms of contact tracing, and do schools need to keep, you know, logs and information like that? I think our recommendation is that you would. I know in terms of practicing and kids doing workouts, I heard a lot of positive things and new ways that people are doing that. I know some are using apps and different things, QR readers for students when they come in, and so they're able to track who is at a workout. So in case an issue arises, they're able to get that information and find out who was involved in that particular event. So I think that information would be important that they have that. Again, the limits of 100 indoor or 250 outdoor includes everybody. We've had that question a lot from schools. So is it just any type of fans or what is it? No, the 100 indoor is all the participants, the coaches, if you have officials, if you have event management, any of that. And then if there's room left over and you choose to do anything with spectators or anything like that, then obviously that all needs to stay within the 100 indoor, but having the ability to track who those people are, to have some type of sign-in system or something where you have that information in case it's needed later would be important. No different than what we're seeing, at restaurants or things like that, if you have those situations going on. So you have that as well. Just trying to flow through to see if there's other.
There was a question, Pete, about students who did not complete, who have incompletes from the spring, about academic flexibility.
Okay. So the academic question, yes. And again, we work closely. In fact, Jennifer and I work closely on some of that language as well. And in following with the guidance that came from ODE, OSAA has been very supportive of that. So students, basically the way that we're looking at it is students who were eligible going into the pandemic, they're eligible coming out of the pandemic. And that's really through no fault of their own. We would make them eligible in terms of OSAA eligibility, provided that you have that credit earning assurance plan in place for them and have a way for them to earn those credits back throughout this school year, that we're going to be flexible and work with that. And our board felt that was important as well. We are still taking academic requests, and they've obviously whittled down to a very small number for those students who were not eligible previously, so maybe at the start of last school year and then remained ineligible. But those are ones that, again, we will take a look at, and our board has instructed me as the person who deals with those, obviously to err on the side of the student in every case possible, and we'll continue to do that. But the key for us is if they were eligible going into the pandemic, for our purposes, they're going to be eligible coming out, knowing that you're working with them to get them back on track, to get them those academic supports that they need and those types of things. We've also worked with a number of schools and school districts here in the past couple of months as scheduling was put together. Obviously, everybody's getting very creative. A lot of people switching from a semester to a quarter plan. In our rules, that has some nuances in terms of what's allowed, what's required in terms of minimums. And we've been able to work that out with schools with some pretty unique situations in our mind, where they have situations where, maybe a couple of school districts, they had to rearrange some schedules so that they had students who really didn't have access to full-time classes all the time. They were, working that out through each quarter, through the length of the semester, in some cases, even through the length of the school year, just in terms of how they were organizing their schedules and making that work. And we can work with schools on that in terms of the eligibility for students. Had several calls last week with school districts on that. It doesn't always fit the policies that we've had in place for 100 years, and that's to be expected given the pandemic. And we're able and prepared to work through that on a case-by-case basis with school districts, and that's proven to be pretty effective as we go. So again, in terms of that eligibility for those students from last spring, we've worked with that. We'll continue to work with that and make sure they have the opportunity to get involved.
And I saw the comment Scott put in the chat too. I know a lot of directors and coaches who are trying to bring their students back on that very minimal level because they're finding, Zoom or Google Classroom is not working for them to be able to engage in something like dance. So for example, and so when they bring in that small group, those protections for kids are very important and at the utmost importance to them. So I'm going to use marching band as an example. We don't oversee marching band, but we have some marching bands that are getting together and are working on practices without instruments because they know the wind instrument may cause some more concerns with the aerosols that are being expelled from them. So they are just literally doing walkthroughs with their marching bands on what it would look like. And they may have a percussionist keeping that beat for them in order to be able to move. But those are the kinds of things we're outside the box thinking that we have directors trying to work through. And again, to engage with kids, which is wonderful. But trying to do it with the utmost care for being careful since COVID-19 is still very present in a lot of our communities. So.
Thank you so much, KT and Peter. I think oh, that's so nice. You're just getting some love in the chat as well. So absolutely echo that. You've been really responsive and so helpful. So appreciate the partnership very much. Want to make sure that I know Glenn Gilbert had a question around what if the metrics might change? So I asked him for some more specifics and have yet to hear. So Glenn, let us know if you have a specific question you want to address.
Yeah,
Um,
can I unmute?
yeah, of course, absolutely. Let us hear your
Sorry,
question.
it's just complicated. It's just complicated to type, and I'm in my car and on my phone.
Oh yeah,
So
no worries,
we're
Glenn.
open. We're open under limited on-site instruction. It's a K through 5, nothing to do with sports or SATs, right? It's a preschool and a K through 5. So the question we have is the rules are slightly different if we reopen under if the metrics are lowered, which we're making an assumption they're going to be at the end of October. And then schools start to reopen based on us meeting those metrics. Can a school that's already doing on-site limited instruction just stick with what we're doing because we don't want to shift back and forth? The main reason we don't want to shift back to opening under the new metrics is we're afraid that once we don't meet the metrics again, because our numbers go up over the winter, that we have to then close, right? So we want to just stay with what we're doing. I don't expect anybody on the call knows the answer to this question, but I just want to put it out there that for folks that are open already, and you get what I'm saying, I think it was just a little complicated to try to type. Can we just stick with what we're doing?
Yeah, go ahead, Scott.
Well, some clarifying questions, and then we could have a larger conversation about metrics, and maybe we'll just have to embrace that and have the SAT guidance come third.
Oh, sorry about that, Scott. I didn't mean to
No,
do
it's
that.
okay.
I just
We differ. No, it's cool. So the question I have for you is when you blend the words together, open, on-site, limited, in person, I don't know, that can create a picture that's not completely clear for me, and my answer will change depending on which one you mean. So on-site is the code word we've agreed to at the state to mean you are fully in person in instruction under like page 1 of following the metrics. So you're down under a 10 per 100,000 case count, and your students are fully in person, much like they would have been pre-COVID, except following all the RSSL safety.
yeah, not that.
Okay, that was what I wanted to clarify. I was guessing you meant that you're doing the limited in-person instruction, which has kids coming physically to be in person. We had to train ourselves not to use the word on-site.
Sorry.
Even though they are on your site and they are there for 2 hours a day, capped at 250 students. That's really what you're referring to. So, yes.
That's correct. Although we're in an interesting situation, Scott, where we're doing the 2 hours a day limited in person. I guess start using the right in person, not on site.
That's okay.
And we've also been approved for emergency childcare. So we're doing a really interesting blend of emergency childcare with basically prioritizing essential workers, and then putting in the 2 hours on site for focus on math and literacy, right?
Yeah.
So it's been an interesting jig, but it's worked. We've got about 80 kids between preschool and K through 5, and so far, knock wood, it's been going well. We've got incredible precautions in place. But if they change the metrics down, say to a considerably lower number,
Right.
And who knows what that is yet, and then all of a sudden we're told, well, everybody's opening back up in the Portland metropolitan area. Can we just kind of stick with what we're doing? We're kind of off in our own little track, and we don't want to go.
Yeah. So I'll take a step back in a minute and talk larger picture about the metrics, just for some larger information. But the short answer is, until that next framework is clear and what it does or doesn't entail, it's hard to give you a answer that might not change and therefore frustrate you. So the short version is I can't pin it down for you. That said, the chances are very high that the structure that is known as limited in-person instruction is going to stick around, and the chances are very low that you would somehow, other than what's already true, which is this is a universal allowance. Anyone in the state can do it as long as they're following sections 1 through 3 of the protocols and they have no confirmed cases of spread in their community. And they're working with LPHA, there's not a metrics number that has to be met to offer the limited in person. It's more about actual spread in the community and these much lower restrictions on cohort size. The likelihood that that will still be there and be available to you is very high. And the idea that there'd be something that would somehow force you out of it is relatively low. Although, you know, I've heard all kinds of discussion in the last week. And, you know, to be completely accurate, but not mislead anybody. So please don't panic or hear this as some runaway thing, but like ideas are out there, like, can people be, you know, if the metrics are below it and we're doing really well, can people be made to deliver something in a formation? I don't think that's very likely, the discussion there, but it is like, you'll hear all kinds of things. So I think you're pretty sure bet. You don't need to really worry. What you're doing will likely go unchanged, but I can't tell you that completely until the new formation is settled between OHA and the governor's office. And that's
I
not.
totally understand, Scott, and I appreciate the candor. You know, I think we've all been living with such uncertainty for so long now. It's become the new norm that everything's uncertain, right?
Yeah.
So we're just hoping that if what we're doing is working, you know, which it is so far, it's that nobody messes with it, right? You know, it's like, if it's not broke, don't fix it. We've got happy parents, happy kids. You know, it's a tightrope walk that we're walking every day, and the teachers are
Brian.
heroes.
Yeah.
But yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks. So I'm now going to try to back my way into being clear about what I absolutely, no one should leave this call thinking that new metrics are out. Let's be very clear about that. And second, let's be very clear that there's actually not directionality to what those new metrics might be. So for any of you looking to like go, and if anything, the one thing you could all do is go tell people to like slow down on the rumor structure in terms of like what is or isn't going to unfold. So there's a big, what is true, there are real significant discussions going on between the governor's office, ODE, OHA, between superintendents and ESD leaders and community organizations. Some of those questions and a presentation will be offered to the Governor's Healthy Schools Reopening Council on Wednesday, this Wednesday, the 21st, for input. There are quite a range of ideas, both in the timing of when an announcement would come and also the timing of when any new thing would come into place. So there's the possibility that it could be like, here's a small change and it's effective immediately. And here's a relatively large change, but it's not effective until, you know, next March or February or January. There's a range of things being discussed in terms of adjustments to the metrics. There's norming, looking at what's going on with other states. And it is definitely a real and wide open conversation. I do not know when that will be landed or decided. I think we'll know more after the gathering on Wednesday. But I have heard timelines that range anywhere between late this week to mid-November. And I don't anticipate it being this week, but it's really hard to know. There's a lot of moving parts to the architecture of this kind of decision. And as you can all tell, everyone is, as soon as it feels up, everyone wants to know what the next thing is going to be. So my main advice to you is just like, you know, let's try to breathe and slow down and avoid the ladder of inference. If you have input and you have channels to give input, do it. If you have questions, ask them. But it's just way too soon for us. We will be unhelpful to try to answer specific questions because we'll create more like rumor or confusion for things that have a lot of different moving parts. So that's kind of the headlines on metrics. Jennifer, anything that you'd add?
No, just I know there's lots of voices that we hear, and specifically for purposes of the recording, I know Glenn in the framing of his question alluded to metrics changing that would result in more students being on site. So I want to be very clear that those were Glenn's words and Glenn's speculation. And I want to reiterate what Scott just named, which is we do not know what the pending outcome may be or may not be of any current conversation. So we want to really be clear that we're not signaling any predictive outcome one way or another.
Jennifer, I just want to say, this is Glenn, I apologize, but I also just want to announce that Darth Vader is Luke Skywalker's father. So I'm sorry about that too. You know, I apologize because I don't want to make it sound like I know anything, right? I only was on a call, 2 calls in the last 2 weeks that kind of talked about it. And they said the same thing. Nothing's certain until there's an announcement. You know,
Oh, yeah.
just,
No, For
I'll just
sure.
talk
No
at this point.
no apologies, Glenn. I just want to make sure because,
Thanks.
you know, I just wanted to clarify that was part of your question framing and nothing that we had said, because I think things like that, comments like that get misunderstood and misattributed to different people. So I just wanted to be thoughtful and careful.
Thanks,
Got it.
Patty, in the
Thank you.
chat for a little bit of humor and grace and kindness. And I promise you, if we had information, one, that we could tell you, but two, that would give you directionality, we would tell you if we were allowed or knew it. But where there is a legitimately real, open, hard conversation with choices that should humble all of us, because there are a lot of tensions in our big and diverse state with very strong opinions on lots of different sides and very hard choices that you're trying to balance. And so we just, I think, need to let that process work itself through. And at the point it becomes like something more concrete, we'll obviously get into it as best we can.
Thank you, Scott. So, so that was the unplanned metrics conversation that came in as the brave number 2 in the sequence of things. So that was beautiful and appropriate. Just wanted to name an appreciation for Peter and KT again for joining us. They're going to stick around for the remainder of the hour should there be any other questions that surface related to their work, athletics, or after school activities. So thank you so much for being here, and put something in the chat if you came specifically to ask it of them and or learn from them. So we want to make sure to create that space. I think with that, we will, there's a question here around transportation, Scott. So we can either field that and then go to the assessment guidance, or jump to the assessment guidance. What's your sense?
Yeah, I'll try to answer them, but one of them I know and one of them I don't. And we
Okay.
can do see if we can do some homework, and then we can go to the assessment guidance, and maybe
Perfect.
I can get some answers by text while we're waiting. So the question about like, can you bus from childcare to limited in person? That's a local decision. You have to wrestle with how you follow guidance that is pretty aligned, but there's a few gaps. There's a different question between what you can do and whether you'll be funded to do it. And that's the part that I need to chase down. So if someone else knows on the call, feel free. I knew the answer to this once a couple of months ago, and I can't pull it out of my head at the moment. So, and I haven't had to answer it for a while. So does someone know if you can reimburse your limited in-person busing at the same rate as the transportation fund? And if not, I'll go do some homework and find out, but I can't remember that.
I don't know that either. I don't think Alexa does either, but we're happy to research and
I'll
come
go.
back.
I think I might have it in my email. So while other people present, I'll see if I can dig it up. And if not, I'll ask somebody else. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. So from there, we're gonna hop to SAT ACT guidance. I'm using that name because it's what's most familiar among us. But the official title of the guidance we're releasing is actually third-party standardized assessment guidance. So we know that's a clunky title. We've been making jokes internally around that title, but wanted to make sure that we are not attributing it only to ACT, SAT, and to make clear that this is standardized assessment guidance that isn't something that the state or the district is mandating or requiring. So it is third-party standardized assessment guidance. So we have completed this guidance. It is going out. I don't believe it has gone out. I believe it is going out yet today. So you will see this. You will see this first. And I've got Dan Farley, our Director of Assessment, here to talk through what we will require of districts that are looking to provide third-party standardized assessment guidance on their campus.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. And I think the guidance is expected to come out within the next hour. Just spoke with our communications team on that effect. So in terms of the requirements for this guidance, we went through, Alexa and I and others went through and kind of basically pulled out the requirements within Ready School Safe Learners that should apply in this context. Those are all listed here specifically, so there doesn't have to be any review them. We did look at the maximum cohorts within each exam room, and that is established at 15 individuals. So that includes students and staff. We also determined that one staff member could not interact with more than 3 cohorts in a given exam session, just to put a limit on that expectation. Masks, of course, have to be worn by all individuals while they're in the testing environment. The 6 feet physical distancing and 35 square foot per person limitations remain even for this context. We put in the expectation that students should be allowed to use the restroom, but encouraged that it be in a staggered manner where they could maintain physical distancing. Also nodding to the fact that the third-party assessments typically have their own requirements around how bathroom breaks are conducted and handled. So to refer to the Proctor guidelines in that situation. So the next expectation is one that is basically specific to the third-party administrations, in that the exam session has to be limited to no more than 6 consecutive hours and cannot be intermittent. That, of course, is different from limited in-person instruction and due largely to test design considerations. Third from last expectation is that the school or district cannot host more than 1 exam session per day. The expectation around the number of individuals who can be on site during the entire duration of the test administration is 250. That includes all students, staff, and adults who are on campus for any reason, including childcare. Finally, the Proctor guides really set the expectation regarding specifics around the test administration process. So what happens within the health and safety requirements in the exam rooms and how students are expected to interact with exam materials is established by respective vendors, and they already have really clear standardized expectations therein to make sure that students get a fair chance to demonstrate what they know and can do on those specific assessments. And that's it in terms of the requirements. So one thing that we know in consultation with representatives from College Board and ACT at least is that this should allow for districts to work with those vendors and set up testing experiences for students that won't interfere with or actually won't impede students from getting to a testing center that's relatively local. So one of the fears, of course, was that, you know, all of the testing centers in Oregon may not be able to open if limited in-person guidance were applied. So this allows students not to have to go absurdly out of their way to participate in a third-party assessment. And for students who are particularly low on resources, that's a really important concern as well.
I just want to jump in and add that we also worked with HEC on this guidance as well. And there's some great pieces coming out from our university system about that they're waiving the college admissions. We put in some resources and some links that will help, you know, if you're having families that are asking questions about that. And then we also, Dan and I also met with both these vendors as well to make sure they were aware of the guidance coming out. They're very supportive and understand the challenge that we've been facing with this.
Yeah, and thanks, Alexa. There's also one more really important like landscape feature that I should name of all people on the planet, which is that the context around college admissions in the admissions decision-making process is changing literally in front of our eyes. The Oregon universities no longer require ACT or SAT for admissions, and that decision goes in perpetuity. The university regents in California voted to suspend the requirement for the next 3 years while they studied the issue and tried to determine whether a different administration or admissions process could be put in place. And in the meantime, that was in May. And between May and now, they've had a state judge actually order California's universities and colleges not to use the ACT or SAT in their admissions decisions. So that's even a step beyond what the university regents has shared. And the current data suggests that at least for this coming year's freshmen, so college freshmen, over 50% of them will not be required to take the ACT or the SAT as part of their admissions experience. So some of that, of course, is related to the impact of the pandemic, and quite a lot of that is pandemic, and extends to some weighty equity concerns that are present in those decision-making processes.
Thank you so much, Dan and Alexa. I just really want to appreciate all your leadership in getting this across the line. Lots of collaboration and work on this effort, and equal parts of appreciation and gratitude for all the patients in the space, because I know this has been something people have been clamoring to get and wanted to see very much. So hopefully this is helpful and helps resolve some questions. Scott, might be helpful to address Brian's question. Looks like he is curious about the science behind this, and would love to talk about that.
Sure. Also, side note on transportation, I can't find it, but I've sent a message to Mike Wiltfong and Brock Ditus, and if we hear back during the thing, we'll add it, and if not, we'll bring it back next week for clarification to follow that thread through. So the first thing to say is no, I don't think there are any epidemiologists on this call, but we have a few, blessedly, that work for the state and some that work for hospitals, and we're in constant communication with them. So the Oregon Health Authority has 40 senior health advisors that huddle and work across sectors, and then a state chief epidemiologist. And all of the choices being made, and whether it's the Ready Schools document or any exception, whether it's comprehensive distance learning and how to do limited in-person instruction with the 10-person cohort, or this guidance, is all running through those public health experts. And they review and look, and they take any question back to that huddle of 40 experts. They consult with folks nationally, they consult with the CDC, and then they come back and make edits or changes. There's obviously a huge amount of input, both in the popular media and in hard science journals.
And you can work. Okay.
And we could provide, they've done a good job documenting at some points studies they're using or pointing to, and the OHA website does a good job of pointing to kind of where they're listening to or getting things. Our job a lot of times is trying to kind of communicate the rationale of those decisions or the logic behind them, as we're all kind of like becoming amateur scientists. Well, we're all scientists in mindset. My high school science teacher and middle school science teacher would say, but our actual expertise is really about the application. So I don't know that will fully satisfy you, Brian. And at some point we could think, Jennifer, about having some of those health advisors on one of these office hours so that folks could talk directly with them and hear their real expertise and background. But I can assure you that the choices being made are made through their expertise and filter, and everything runs through them. So hopefully that answers a little bit, Brian.
Also, lesson learned, I should have the title third-party standardized assessment guidance wouldn't fit on the slide with all the requirements. So I'm already regretting that I didn't include it, because it's yielded lots of confusion in the chat, and appreciation for the private messages. People are wondering, does this also apply to the SBAC? No, it does not. So this is just for a third-party assessment guidance. So the College Board, for example, sponsors SAT, hence third party. So anything that's required within our system, within this public school system, is not considered third-party standardized assessment. So hopefully that helps to clarify. So Sue Wilson has patiently been bringing forward the question around credit earning assurance plans. And it's an important question, Sue, and you're not alone in bringing it up. So I wanted to kind of gauge where we are with time, because if there aren't any other questions around this ACT, SAT, third party assessment guidance, and no other questions emerging for our colleagues or our friends at OSAA, my suggestion is we transition and talk about Sue Wilson's question. How does that feel, Scott, from your perspective as you're also taking a look at what's out there? All right. So Sue, could you bring us into your question and frame what you're wondering and what you're hoping to most learn and discover about the credit earning assurance plans as it relates to incompletes from distance learning for all in spring of 2020?
Hi, thank you. The question is coming mostly for where the responsibility lies for incompletes that were earned in the spring for students who transferred to another district. And do they write a, should a plan come with them, or should the new district write a plan? And if so, are they able to override an incomplete? And there's lots of questions about, like, you know, change of grade and if that's allowed on a prior transcript. Hopefully that helps.
Absolutely. So first of all, I want to set some common context so we're all mapping onto the same conversation. So as you know, during spring of 2020, we wrote guidance called Distance Learning for All. And in that Distance Learning for All guidance, there was a safeguarding student opportunity clause. And that safeguarding opportunity clause indicated that for any student that did not in any way engage, so there was no evidence of engagement, they didn't log on to any class session, they didn't respond to any telephone call, and or for a student who legitimately did not complete minimum standard to earn a pass, that student would then receive an incomplete on their transcript. And then subsequently, the following year, so fall of 2020, 2021, the school year that we're currently in, the school would then work in coordination with the student's guardian, the student's family, to, by the end of September, create a credit earning, I'm forgetting the name of it, credit earning assurance plan, sorry. And that plan would set forward a course by which students would be able to remediate that credit and have access to the missed learning. So the question that you ask, we have fielded this question, and here's where our current thinking is, and help make it better and help poke at anything that doesn't quite make sense. So the way we've addressed this to date, Sue, is that it's similarly to before COVID. If a student came to you that was a sophomore and didn't pass their courses in the previous semester, you would not look back to the sending district or the sending school as being responsible for helping build proficiency going forward. So that's the same would follow true and be true in this current context. So whoever is receiving the student, whoever is serving the student in this present term is responsible for creating the credit earning assurance plan in concert with the student and the family. We recognize that in some situations that's difficult because there may be a course that a student received an incomplete on that you may just not offer. So we're asking for really creative problem solving in the best way that works for you and your local context. So I've worked with some folks who were able to reach back to the sending district and actually get a course syllabus and work to create an independent study project for that student that allowed them to earn proficiency and demonstrate proficiency and therefore earn the credit for that course on their transcript. Others have said we don't have the capacity to do that, so we're going to focus on creating a different course that still gets at the essential requirements for that student so that they are well set up on their course, on their pathway to graduation. So I would say that's the answer that we've been giving to your question. Alexa or Dan, anything to add to that you think I've missed?
No, I think you got it. I think you got it all. I think it really depends on the context.
And Ashley's put in there the state safeguarding student opportunity clause as reference. So thank you, Ashley, for including that link. The other thing I'll remind folks around is that the notion, remember, so because the entire state was in the public system, in any case, was under pass or incomplete, that threshold for a pass is different than it would have been in typical context. And so we are also very careful to make that point in our guidance that for a student, let's say a student got an incomplete in their algebra course, that we want to make sure that the threshold that is created for the student to recoup that credit or recoup that credit on their transcript, that student isn't held to a higher threshold of learning or course completion than they would have been in the spring. So that hopefully also breathes some grace and space into the system a little bit for folks. And the last thing, I know Lex and I have talked with people, I'd say places that are having the best success with this notion are looking for where they can connect learning and weave learning into the student's current course load, especially for students that have a high number of incompletes, as a way to really help the student not be overburdened with having a full set of courses currently and then having to make up all of their spring courses, for example, should that be a student's experience. So any ways that we can integrate learning, add it, combine it to their current courses of study, of course, in ways that are authentic and make good sense. But if there are any of those ways to really pollinate, cross-coordinate, and integrate a student's learning, we know that's not only better for how the brain makes good sense and holds on to new learning, but also will really help the student not be overloaded and overwhelmed in their schedule.
And the other thing I would just say is that because these are high school students, I mean, my strongest recommendation is to have a conversation with the student. We know that courses built, that student may say, I really need to retake that course. I didn't understand it. I was lost. So having those conversations with the family and the student is critical. You can always reach back to that other counselor, that school counselor. If they say, listen, I got all this, I just had missed a few assignments, we can reach out. So I think that partnership with the family and really talking to the student about their learning, because the ultimate goal isn't just for them to be for us to be like credit giving machines, and that we really want students to be prepared for what they're going to do next. So engaging students in that conversation and families, I just think is really an important piece of this as well.
Thank you, Alexa. So Sue's confirming in the chat that was very helpful. So I'm glad that we had time to address that as well. And wanted to make sure that we left from space for our final question which is what should we talk about next Monday? So anything that you would like us to incorporate planning forward? You can go ahead and put it in the chat or unmute yourself, either way.
Scott, can we talk a little bit about the limited in-person numbers versus K3 exception? Specifically,
yeah, let me, do you want to restate it one more time? And I'll try to do it briefly now.
We're just trying to wrap our head around as we start to look to incorporate PE instruction into our K3 schools right now. What are the as limited in person limits them to 3 cohorts a day, 5 in a week. Does that apply to K3 instruction?
Yeah. It came back to me as you were talking. So this is Brian Trendle. He is asking about cohorting and how they interface, and if limited in-person instruction cohorts, how they interact with K3 exception. So Brian, the short version is the K3 exception has its own set of metric exceptions to meet, but it does not come, and let's pull up real quick and make sure that I want to think through something with you that I don't want to lose track of. So the short answer, the kind of cleanest answer is You are not bound to the smaller cohorts for limited in-person instruction for the K-3 exception. That's like the short answer. I will remind everyone, although we forget it often, that Ready Schools recommends cohort sizes of 24 to 36. And that's recommended by OHA for reasons that people have started to realize, which is if you have an actual case and need to contact trace and quarantine, and I think, Brian, you mentioned this the other day, like the smaller cohort size you have, the more you're able to quarantine a small group and keep everyone else operating, where if you kind of blow out cohort size, now that obviously has an instructional tension, maybe less so with elementary school than with upper grades, but understand there's like design challenges around that, but that would really be the recommended. So the idea is not like to go all the way up. That said, Ready Schools offers a maximum total cohort size of 100 for students. The part where there's a little, so that's your general framework, is you're working on that with K-3, on that cohort structure, and you don't have to, you can treat it separately from limited in person. You would want to factor in, if you have K-3 students who are your transportation and cohort integration with limited in person, you want to think through the transportation dynamics around that, depending on the design.
Yeah, Scott, my question really is more, because we're keeping our cohorts small.
Okay.
But the question is really, how many cohorts could that PE teacher see in the course of a week?
There is
The
not
cohorts
a
are like
limit for
10.
good. Yeah, thanks for getting it really clear. And I have one other caveat to give you, but yeah, the staff are not limited to a cohort number on the main Ready Schools structure. So that would be true here as well. So there's not an upper limit, but you'll want to be mindful about that just because it's true. So you still want to mitigate risk just because you can change, but there's not a formal cap there under the K-3 exception.
Okay, thank you.
Jennifer had to go because we're all got 4 o'clocks. I do too. Apologize. We usually try to stay on and hang out or answer additional questions, but we covered a lot and ran right up to the minute. We'll be back again next Monday at 3. And I think, Ashley, is it true that the Zoom now is the same Zoom each time?
Yes, that is correct.
If you want to bookmark it in your calendar, you won't have to go hunting for links in the future. All right. Thanks, everybody.